Hi,
There she is. Hello.
how are you doing?
I'm good. How are you, cutie?
Oh goodness, sorry that I am a mess today. I thought that I would be out of here already because I got here at like 7:30, but
One of them days.
yeah, one of them days, exactly.
How are you doing?
Um, didn't sleep very well last night. Was studying for boards till really late, and
Okay.
then thought I was gonna sleep in and just come late and, work. But I ended up getting up early. Like I slept for 3 hours and then I was like, you know what? Let me just go knock out these patients, see them, and then come back. But then the day has just dragged on, you
Mhm.
know?
Especially when you're kind of operating on very little sleep.
Yes, exactly. And I did it to myself. Like, I've just been like in go mode, like trying to study for boards and do this integrative psychiatry thing and get, grow this private practice and stay on top of my emails and, see all these patients and, go above and beyond. Like I'm just burning myself out and I need to totally take a break.
Hmm.
I need to just like chill.
Girl, that's exactly what I thought when you sent me that email with like all the stuff. I was like, okay, I've been there before. It's like you take on so much that
Yeah.
you actually don't end up seeing progress in any area,
Oh, I see. Yeah.
right? Because we're trying to do kind of like we're trying to do as much as we can on each thing and try to move everything along. Whereas
Yeah.
if we were to prioritize, like what is it that we need to get done first,
Yeah.
and how do we allocate our time and our schedule to ensure that those things get done, we're able
Right.
to move things from not done to done, not done to done, right?
Right.
But right now you've got like a bunch of not done and they're slowly moving along. Nothing is done, so it stays heavy,
Yep.
right?
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, that's actually one of the things I wanted to talk to you about today. I think that you have so many amazing ideas and things that you want to do, right? From like working on getting your boards and, doing your tests and all that stuff to like building your practice, to doing some of the other things, your passion projects around empath medicine, to like figuring out like, okay, I also need to think about myself, my well-being, my health,
Mm-hmm.
fitness, how do I do everything without blowing myself up without,
Yes,
without burning the candle on both ends, because that's only gonna
exactly.
last so long, right? Like that's a ticking time bomb for you.
Exactly. No,
Yeah.
I'm with you.
Okay, good. So then before we dive into things, I guess I wanted to know, like, is there anything specific or particular that you want to bring into the conversation today?
Well, I did notice myself having some like negative self-talk. So like today
Okay.
I met with a recruiter that at like a one of the Ivy Leagues, and they're here out here on the East Coast and they're looking to hire a consultant psychiatrist. And because I hadn't really slept well, I just like feel like I overshared and was like rambling. And I was like, oh my God, I think I totally blew it. And I was like going through all this like negative, like, negative self talk. The typical female ADHD brain of going back and recounting all social experiences and thinking to yourself, gosh, judging yourself before others judge you. And so I was like thinking to myself, like, oh goodness. But she ended up emailing me at the end and was like, it was great chatting with you. And I'm going to send your CV over to the chairperson and I'll hear back from you. You'll hear back from us sometime next week for next steps. But then I was like, she's probably just delaying it for next week. And then it's just going to like, disappear. They'll never respond back. And it'll just sort of disappear into la la land. And then I just had this moment of noticing, and I was like, huh, when I don't sleep, my brain defaults into negativity.
Correct.
And I was like, oh, buddy, oh boy, and I dislike that feeling.
Mhm.
Um, so and something interesting too, just kind of like my own physiology. I recalled that like yesterday, however, on the flip side, I felt really energized. I felt really good. I was kicking ass. I was feeling so like by by doing well, I meant like, I mean, completing tasks, staying organized,
Mhm.
um, managing my priorities, managing what I need to do. And I felt very clear headed and I felt very happy. And I recognized that some of my discontent in life has nothing really to do, very little to do with the external circumstances, but it's primarily my internal, right? And it's primarily how well I feel I am accomplishing things, right? Or which I shouldn't necessarily shoulda, woulda, but like I noticed that this is what happens with my brain, that my sense of value, my sense of self-worth, my sense of satisfaction in life is is heavily dependent upon my level of production and how well I reach milestones, how organized I am. And I realized something that is almost a way for me. I've struggled with ADHD for such a long time. And I've had lots of negative self-talk about what it means to have ADHD, how to be like, what it means to be neurodivergent and always feeling different and feeling like, gosh, I don't do it the same way other people do it. Even when I talk to my patients, I'll follow their chaos when I'm trying to gather a history. I'm not as strict or rigid where I'm like, I need to go in order and get but I see my colleagues doing it in a very organized, orderly fashion, which then checks everything off the checklist. But then I also notice on the flip side, one of the cons is that it doesn't build as much rapport with the patient. Whereas for me, I'm kind of like filling in the gaps, going with their flow, and then
Yeah.
coming back. So I see that there are positives to the ADHD, but oftentimes I find myself battling it very hard, very heavy. And so it's almost like I'm attempting to kind of circle back to the main point here. Um, I am attempting to prove to myself that I am overcoming ADHD. And that is what provides me with a sense of self-worth because there is a lot of guilt for having it. There's a lot of guilt for feeling different and for feeling like um, feeling those moments where I procrastinated or the many moments was disorganized or was impulsive or spoke too soon or interrupted somebody or overshared, you know, um, or just didn't fit in with the culture because of my personality.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of guilt and a lot of pain and a lot of sadness. And, I find that attempting to prove to myself through productivity, through going all the way and pushing myself really, really hard to the point of burnout is the only way. It's, of course, a mistaken belief. The only way to prove that I have overcome it or that I am strong enough, um, that I am enough, actually. That's it, that I am enough. I'm enough of a doctor. I'm enough of a productive, like I'm enough. That's it, and it's hard to feel enough when I've been battling with ADHD for so long. So I've just been noticing like you know, the internal chemistry of the brain and just kind of that satisfaction versus the dissatisfaction, what it's related to. And I think some of it has to do with my own beliefs about being a little neurodivergent. And, I'm not complaining. There are people that are far more neurodivergent
Mhm.
and they've got it it's so much more challenging, right? And I can only imagine. Um, but I do have moments where I feel quite different um, than my peers, and makes me wonder, do I fit in, right? But my patients tend to do well, love me, tend to do very well with me. I tend to do very well with them.
Yeah.
But yeah,
Yeah. And sometimes we battle like what we think reality is and the evidence that reality shows. Like your patients are evidence that something that you're doing is working,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
You're internalizing it as this is, I feel guilt and shame around this thing that I have, and I'm trying to do everything to overcome it and conquer it. But if you're trying to do everything to conquer it, how can that actually not help your patients? Like, look at it as this is something I struggle with, and things are harder for me than it is for my peers. But, or, and it's also kind of my superpower because
Yeah.
I don't think in a linear fashion. I don't
Right.
think that actually sometimes the discoveries come from nonlinear thinking, some
Yep.
patterns, right? It, it's the reason that you're able to see the things that others normally can't is because you have nonlinear thinking.
Right.
But
Mhm.
sometimes nonlinear thinking gets you into trouble,
Yes, it
right?
does.
Like speaking too soon or oversharing or like just, oh, and then because you're such a self-aware doctor, you catch yourself. And then when you catch yourself, you guilt yourself.
Right.
You beat yourself up about it. But what if you were to let go? What would it feel like if you were to just let go and say, it is what it is, and I am who I am?
Mm, scary.
Scary. Okay.
Like at first it feels relieving, but then it's almost scary because it's almost like fear, a level of fear of the unknown,
Okay.
a little bit of fear of the and I'll dive a little deeper into that. If I were to let go of that, there's a bit of a feeling of jumping off of a cliff.
Mm,
That's why there's the fear. I don't know why I'm getting that image. But letting it go, it's almost like it's almost like I've carried something really heavy for so long that has become so familiar to me
mm,
that if I were to let it go, I would want to replace it with something else. What would I replace my ruminating thoughts with? I mean, I wonder, right? Like I want, like it's almost like I'm connected to something that's it's the sense of letting go of the familiar.
mm. Yeah. And
That's, yeah,
what is letting go? Like, what does letting go look like to you? What does that look like?
letting go of control, um, breathing, relaxing my diaphragm, like, if they're physical experiences, um, letting go specifically of the judgments regarding having an ADHD brain, um, would help me forgive myself. But I don't know if I'm ready to do that yet. Like it's almost like I am punishing myself,
Yeah.
right? And it's almost like it could also serve as like a reason, like, oh, this person didn't like me, oh, it's because I have ADHD. It's like a nice cop out reason too. It's comfortable, right? Instead of being like, well, maybe something was intrinsically wrong with me, or something wrong was with that interaction, right? So I do believe that also there's a little bit of that too, um, of it can serve as, I don't want to use the word cop out, but like it can serve as like reasoning for the pain of why sometimes I don't feel like I fit in. And this is actually a big deal, um, is a sense of belonging.
Mm,
A sense of belonging, I think I've been really battling. And I think, the ADHD, it even goes a deeper layer under the belonging, right? Or under the ADHD, sorry, the sense of belonging. Even just simply my faith, um, having a Middle Eastern name. Um, uh, Even I remember being a brunette, like some of my earliest memories, I remember feeling so different in elementary school. And because I was like the only brunette that I could remember in
Mm.
my class, where everybody else was blonde and had blue eyes. And I felt so different. Like, and I was told, like, you know, we're not like white people. We don't go and do sleepovers and we don't do all these things. And oh my God, that's so funny. I feel like I'm gonna cry. And I don't even know why. It's like ever since I was a kid, um, yeah, there's like this void, this gap of friendships. And you know, in my adult life, I have a lot of meaningful, thankfully, relationships.
Mhm.
But I'm not the kind of person that just will hit up my friend and say, "Hey, let's go do nothing for a while." Like I'm always like, let's go, like I need to do something. You want to accompany me while I do this, or you need to do something. Why don't I accompany you? I want to catch up with your life. Do you want to work on a project together? Let's talk on the phone and catch up and have a meaningful conversation. But the whole like just shooting the shit, just literally just spending time with one another, that I've seen it as a waste of time, you
Mhm.
know? And ever since I was a kid, Mary, like I feel like yeah, I've really struggled with feeling like I belong. And I think that letting go of the judgments will bring me to that even deeper pain,
Okay.
you know? And recognizing that deeper pain, will I ever belong, right? Like it's a similar theme, like when I wore hijab versus when I went into medicine, but also battle ADHD and I'm neurodivergent, when I decided to do psychiatry and not regular medicine, right? Um, Even being at that particular hospital years ago, where I ended up leaving because I, got sick and it was a toxic work environment, like feeling like, gosh, I didn't belong. Um, and so I do believe like at that particular job, like had I just shot the shit with people, like, schmoozed, I don't know that it would have been as toxic of an experience. Um, and then and it brings me back, you know, 180 to or 360 to the conversation today. Again, that pain came up when I was like, uh-oh, I just overshared. I nerded out. She doesn't think I'm fun. She doesn't think I'm going to fit in with the crowd, you know? Um, I'm not cool enough. Like, even though when people know me, like, when I'm in my element, I feel like I'm actually like I have a very good sense of self. Like I actually feel very cool, shall we say, or very like comfortable, you know? Um, but it's like in professional environments, there's some trepidation because it's about performance and achievement.
Right. And would you say that you hold yourself to a much higher standard than most?
Oh, yes, I do. Absolutely, I do. Because yeah, you're right, I do. Because I'll often look at, um, yeah, I do. I think I'm trying to prove to other doctors that psychiatrists are competent.
Okay.
You know, why? Yeah, and we should go into that. Honestly, we should go into that. Maybe a part of it is I'm trying to prove to myself, you know, that I'm competent. Like I chose, uh, I don't know. I need to look into that. And I'm writing it down. But interesting. There's like a block there. I just forgot about what I was gonna say. So there's an emotion there. So
Okay.
I think I need to like, or what was the thought before the psychiatrists are competent? Do I hold myself to a higher standard? Yes. Yes. And the thought that I had was sometimes there's an ugly judgment that I have that I hate to admit, but I have to admit it because that's where the block came from. And I sort of judge people that don't. I sort of judge other physicians that are like lazy or don't care about the patient, don't appear to care, don't go above and beyond, you know, talk, talk their way out of doing something that would be in the best interest of the patient, politicize things,
Right.
talk poorly about the patient, um, distance themselves from the patient, um, don't don't focus on their grammar or their spelling with notes in the electronic medical record. Don't even write notes. um,
Okay. No, that's good. So you, in addition to you actually judging yourself, even though you have very, very high expectations of yourself and others, right? You're also feeling like it bothers you when others don't measure up to
yeah,
think the standard of care should be. But what if that doctor spent less time with that patient because that's what that doctor needs to be able to keep their caseload balanced?
right.
Right? Because if they spent more time with one patient, it takes away from another patient, or maybe it just takes away from their mental health and well-being, right? We've talked previously about just how
Mhm.
taxed doctors are.
Yep.
And maybe what you see as somebody not giving their full in terms of care,
Self-care.
right? But maybe that's just another way of somebody creating a boundary for themselves and not going down the rabbit hole or not being able to give the 1,000% for every patient because at the end they're going to burn out. And they're trying to figure out like what is that minimum effective dose where the patient gets what they need and it doesn't burn out the doctor,
I
right?
love that. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So what does that look like for you? Because we've talked about burnout. We've talked about, taking on too much um, simultaneously, right? And you mentioned at the beginning of our call that, you notice that if your physiology is not at 100%, if you don't have the proper sleep, it affects your thoughts, right? It affects how you think, how you process things, how you judge yourself, how you feel about yourself, how you interpret your situations,
Mm-hmm.
right? So I would invite you to sort of reflect on like, okay, how do I release the judgment? And we can talk about like just starting with you, right? Like we can talk about others another time, but we can just start with you on like, okay, I have ADHD and I have a lot of guilt, shame, and judgment around my ADHD because it's creating these outcomes.
Yeah.
But that's your perception of your reality that it's creating those outcomes, right? Like maybe, just maybe, it isn't creating those outcomes.
Mm-hmm.
Can we backtrack and say, like, what evidence is there that actually I overshared? Because it sounds like she did send you an email.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like, okay, it looked like it was going in the wrong direction, but to the contrary, or here's some evidence showing that things were fine. She'll contact me next week. It's Friday. That's normal, right?
Mm-hmm.
People trying to get things off their plate and it'll spill over into the following week. That's totally normal. Right? So in the moment of judgment, I do hear that you have a lot of awareness around when you're judging yourself. So in that moment, what could you tell yourself that would actually promote more self-compassion rather than judgment?
Yeah. Um, that's a great question. Something I did do in real time was I referenced like spirituality and my belief system of believing that what's meant to be is meant to be, no matter what who I talk to or what I botch. Like, what if I was supposed to botch it because I'm not supposed to land there? I'm supposed to land somewhere else because I'm still like not sure. The pay wasn't that great, even though it was an Ivy League and I'd be teaching residents and I'd be, at this great institution, but like the pay wasn't all that good. Um, I that wouldn't allow me to go back to complete my child fellowship just yet, right? I'd have to wait on that a little bit. I would still be in the cold, Northeast, you know. I would, it would be a completely different state that I haven't like worked in before, like a lot of trepidation. And so like I thought to myself, like, like letting go of the attachment is healthy, of letting go of the outcome. Like I leaned into the so what? Like, let's say that negative outcome, and I know what you're presenting is something different, that the negative outcome wasn't truly negative. There's a cognitive restructuring that needs to happen here. That let's look at the evidence against that negative belief, right? That negative thought. But let's say that the outcome was negative. This was before I received that email. So what?
Mm.
So what? I have other options. And that that idea of feeling full, and feeling like I know what I have to offer, having that self-esteem of I know what I have to offer. I know who I am. That is what I'm seeking and what I miss. And interestingly enough, I have that feeling when I'm around people that I feel like I have a sense of belonging with. But when I'm around people where I feel different from, let's say like they're not a minority, I tend to do very much better with minorities, but people who are straight up white, I find myself wanting inadvertently, unconsciously, feeling the need to prove myself or my sense of belonging. And it's a really painful experience because I feel disgusted that I do that. I'm just like, ugh, like, why do I feel the need to, like I'm proud to have my like faith tradition and to have my cultural background and to be from a holy land that like, is full of history, right? Despite how the world might see them currently. But I understand in history, like where we've come from, and we have a very, very, strong background, and I'm proud of the culture. I really am. But there is this intrinsic sense of feeling insecure,
Mhm.
feeling less than by being a minority, and so I find that really interesting. And this goes into the minimum effective dose, because it goes into the concept of boundary setting with a patient, with others. So similarly, when I feel secure, um, I'm more easily able to set boundaries with people because I feel secure with the relationship. So I feel like I can say, well, what are you going to offer me? Right. But when I don't feel like I have a sense of belonging, then there's an insecure attachment. There's an imbalance of a perception of an imbalance in power. And then I start to feel like I need to prove myself that I exist. Like I exist. That's like a yearning to be seen, like just a yearning to exist. Yeah, and to not be ignored, to be seen, to matter. That's really a bigger one, is a yearning to matter. I think even bigger than the existing, a yearning to matter. And I believe that in order to feel like I matter or to prove to myself in the field of medicine amongst people of many different backgrounds, to the white male chairperson, of the department, or whoever he may be, or she may be, right? It's almost like I am attempting to go above and beyond to prove myself and have a difficult time setting those boundaries with patients because I feel like in order to be a good doctor, I need to be the best doctor to them. I need to give them everything that they're looking for. And some of it might be to prove to myself that I'm a good doctor, and some of it might be to inadvertently and unconsciously prove to other people that I'm a good doctor. You
Mhm.
know, some of it could be that. I think it's also as I'm leaning into that feeling of why that workaholicness, like where does that come from? Um, just leaning into it a little bit, but yeah, it's like, am I useful? My utility is what defines my sense of self-worth. It's a, of course, a mistaken belief, but um, how useful am I, and how am I, this is also somewhat religious, and some of it is a little bit of like the religious pressure, I think, of like the concept of good deeds and the concept of like you're only here for a limited period of time and then you're gonna die. You know what
Yeah,
I mean? It's like, all right, sure. You know what I mean? But like,
you're still here.
right, but it's like even the prophets, like their tradition was so existential, so like they were so like present,
Mhm.
right? So compassionate, like we believe like Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, was like he made everyone feel like he was their best friend because of the level of like eye contact and intimacy, emotional intimacy that was present. They would cry, the companions, amongst one another when they would hear a verse, or like they would like I remember a story of like when the prophet, like he like saw the necklace of Khadija years, maybe decades even after she had died. He started weeping because, and like just the amount of like emotional like connectedness that they had. So like I know that like this is my interpretation and what's been taught to me, right? But it's this concept of achievement. Must achieve more. And I believe that this is from the lack of finding a dopamine rush, finding like a sense of security from relationships.
Mhm.
So then I jump to, well, if I can't have relationships, then I'm going to achieve. And I skip that stage of development.
You're overcompensating.
I'm overcompensating with achievement.
Mhm.
Yeah, sorry. What the heck is this? Yeah, not picking up the phone. I'm just like, what the heck is this? What is this thing called, a telephone?
Well,
Uh,
that's
yeah, it's 4:36 on a Friday. I think I have the right not to pick up the phone. If they need me, they'll page me. But yeah, so yeah, Mary, like I feel like so like absolutely, like I think this is all so related. Sense
it.
of belonging, ADHD, building relationships, then moving forward to achievement, yearning to matter, yearning to exist, the minimum effective dose, boundary setting with others, boundary setting with the patient.
Right.
And so, how do I move forward with building better relationships? And I believe it starts with building a relationship with myself, right? And how do I build a better relationship with myself? It's got to start with forgiving myself
Yeah.
and letting go, like you mentioned, of
Mhm.
judgment,
Mhm.
of the guilt, and of the judgment. And um, but if I let go of the judgment, then what parameters do I then have to keep me out of trouble? Right? That sense of safety. It's like, uh-oh, I don't feel emotionally safe anymore if I don't have these bumpers on the bowling alley. Those are my judgments.
Right. But at the same time, you really don't have those bumpers in the bowling alley because your judgments only happen after that ball goes into the gutter.
So good.
right?
Yes.
So those bumpers, they're in that's hindsight, right? You're talking about hindsight. Those bumpers, I mean, you're just beating yourself up with a bat, is what you're doing, right? You've done the thing, you've judged yourself on the thing, and then you start negative self-talking yourself about the thing, right? And that does not help you not do the thing again because you're going to do it again.
Right.
So it's like, okay, so how do I interact better with once I do the thing, right? Because the first step is just accepting that it's gonna happen, right? There's things sometimes that we can try to control, but we also have to accept the fact that we can't control things all the time. And that's part of the letting go, right? Letting go of the fact that like I can't guarantee 100% of the time that I can control what comes out of my mouth.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And just knowing I'm neurodivergent, I'm ADHD, I know that I will slip up.
Mm-hmm.
How do I interact with that? And that's part of the uncertainty. Part of it is you create uncertainty for yourself, right? But then you're going to get into like an anxiety loop if you keep thinking about like the next time, if it happens again. And possibly you are trying to, guilt or shame yourself into like, you shouldn't have done that, shouldn't do this. Now this is what's happening because like, and now we're starting to create a narrative around what happened and what the outcome was. And that may be real or it could be perceived, but
Right.
you don't know, right? And your
Right.
brain is going to tell you, yeah, it's real, right? You are the reason for this. Of
Right.
course, we're much more likely to think negatively than we are to think positively, right?
That's so interesting. That's the default of the brain.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Mhm.
And of course, as you know, like our brain is always there to
It's
keep us
about to safe.
yeah,
Yeah.
safety, safety, right? I mean, even you talking badly about yourself and judging yourself, like you deferred that to like, well, that's just how I create safety.
Mm-hmm.
But it's not, only because there is no safety. This is all after the fact, right? So they're really what it's doing is like you're disempowering yourself,
Mm-hmm.
right? Through a specific thought pattern, right? And you do it because it's familiar. You're used to beating
Yes.
about it. You're used to making yourself feel bad. That's familiar, right? But
Yes.
I also heard you say something that I really liked. You said, um, what if that thing not happening is actually a good thing? What if
Right.
an opportunity is a good thing? So then could we reframe when something like this happens and we just stay neutral, right? I'm not saying turn a negative into a positive,
Yeah.
I'm saying like how can we stay neutral? Because you also said that you notice that when you detach from the outcome, things are better. When we're detached from the result, when we're detached from the outcome. So what if the outcome wasn't good or bad, but you thought everything is happening for my highest good, for my greatest good. I'm
Mm-hmm.
exactly where I need to be. What's meant for me will never pass me by. Sometimes letting go of the outcome and letting go of that control actually is freeing.
Yeah.
What will what happened happened. So now what will happen will happen. There's nothing you could have said different because you didn't say it different.
Mm-hmm.
There's nothing you could have done different because you didn't do it different.
Right. We've been trying to, this person and I have been trying to get a hold of each other for a very long time. And I happened to say, yes, I happen to be free today at 1 o'clock. And on this day, I happen to not get good sleep. And I happen to be in, all of these variables. And we could have happened to have a conversation just yesterday when I was in a much, you know,
Mhm.
better mood. Could have sold myself a little bit better.
Okay.
Um, but it seems to me like sometimes these variables are also, they somewhat collide. Um, there's a lot to be said about timing,
Mhm.
you know, and why things happen when they do, and why do they happen. Um, Plus, I think sometimes when I start to over talk, It's because I am feeling a certain way that I'm not recognizing, not sitting with it,
Okay.
right? So, like, for example, as I reflect back just specifically at that conversation, um, her voice was really aggressive and assertive and uncomfortable. And she came off as, well, you've done so much, but then she went to say what I've done, and you could tell that she had just cursely like looked over the CV, you know? And my attempt to talk a lot was to tell her more about myself, was to say, okay, well, can I, and I asked her, can I tell you a little bit more about myself and what I'm looking to do, and um, you know, what I'm doing right now too, in addition to my fellowship, etc. She said yes, but I noticed a little bit of hesitation in her voice. So instead of sitting with that hesitation and adjusting and recognizing maybe she doesn't want to hear it or
Mhm.
something, I then somewhat overcompensated and was like, well, let me make it interesting and actually like, you know, all these like like all these like unconscious experiences that are occurring in real time that are a lot harder to manage in real time. Um, and then when she mentioned something to the effect of, after I shared all that, well, what questions do you have for me? And I was like, well, why don't you tell me about the program? Like, and so that's when I thought, like, okay, maybe she has tuned out and she is not interested in pursuing this conversation. And so she's asking me, like, what questions do you have for me? Like, that's what I ask my patients when I'm wrapping up the session. What questions do you have for me? So I felt like, okay, so that was a little standoffish, like, all right. So I mentioned, so I was like, well, why don't you tell me about the position? What is it? Tell me a little bit more. Um, and then I mentioned, and what are you guys looking for in a person in terms of their personality, in terms of, like their background? And she checked off a lot of things that I have. And then she also mentioned, and we're a really fun crowd, like we play hard and we work hard. We do karaoke and we do all these things and da 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 da. And then I automatically noticed myself wanting to say something, wanting to prove to her, like, oh yeah, well, I'm cool too. I am fun. You just don't know that because you only saw the nerdy part of me. So I was like, well, interestingly enough, I like to sing, and my husband and I just recorded a song, and you know, and anyway, so there was also a moment when she did mention the salary, which is like significantly lower
Mhm.
than other potential opportunities. And she was like, and if that's a deal breaker for you, that's perfectly fine. I totally understand. I saw that as her inviting me to walk away. I saw it as like, oh, she's again more more negative reassurance of something, like my own interpretation of something being negative, right? Like assuming, it's not making assumptions, assuming that she um she was inviting me to exit the interview, right? To be like, if this is like a deal breaker, that's okay. I get it. Please say yes, it's a deal breaker. Please, that's the feeling I got, right?
Yeah. And that's your experience with it based on possibly, past trauma and wounding, abandonment wounds, where we kind of jump to the conclusion of like, they don't want me, they don't like me. They're giving me an out. But what if you were like the 10th person she's talked to, and all the 9 others were amazing, but they rejected the offer because they're not good with the salary. That's
Right.
the thing. We don't know the other side of the story, right? And
Mm-hmm.
why she's so quick to judge.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe the last 9 people were like, there's no way I'm going to come and work there at that salary. You are not being competitive with what others are offering, right?
Mm-hmm.
She's just expecting the worst, right? That you wouldn't agree to that position to work for them at that price.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true. And I mentioned to her, I mean, I even asked her, I asked her adding an extra $30,000 because that was the number I was truly given at some other place years ago.
Mhm.
Um, and I mentioned, would this be a problem for you guys? Like, is that too high of a reach for you guys to adjust to that price, to that salary? And she goes, honestly, yes, it would be. I said, oh, and then she expected me to be rejecting of them. And I said, no, no, I'm just thinking out loud here. I'm just comparing and contrasting in my head, of physicians and what I've heard of other programs. So maybe she thought that, maybe yeah, I mean, this is an excellent, excellent point that perhaps she felt like I was almost too good for the program, that I would reject them.
Mhm.
And so she kind of like shut down, if she even did, and
Right.
was
Don't know, right?
right,
Like we don't know exactly why she said what she said.
right.
And that's what we have to always remember is that there could be multiple reasons, but we as humans tend to pick the worst one and decide that that's what it was.
Yes.
No?
You know why I think we do that?
Mhm.
I have a theory, but I could be wrong.
Okay.
Um, our memories are 12 times stronger, the emotion that when there's an emotion attributed to it, right? And I wonder if the one that elicits the strongest emotion is
Mhm.
the one that feels to be the most true simply because it elicits a strong emotion. But in reality, it's not the most truthful. It's just the one that provided the greatest gut, shall we say, reaction.
Well, maybe it was because it was the one that was most familiar to us.
Yes, and our strongest gut reaction tends to be potentially the thing that's most familiar because it's the thing that hurts the most, the thing that we're still battling, or our demons, our unfinished business, etc. And it's our worst nightmare. It's our greatest fear.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah,
The shadow self,
the
right?
shadow self. Yes, yes,
Instead of feeding it, right? We tend to feed it, which
yeah,
is why it stays with us. And, we feed it, we grow it, we nourish it. Instead of feeding it, we got to recognize it and say, hey, you don't serve me. You don't serve my current self and you don't serve my future self, right?
right,
You only serve my past self.
right.
So, how do we recognize when we're self sabotaging, right?
Mm,
What we're doing is we're self sabotaging ourselves.
mm-hmm.
It's disempowering thoughts, beliefs, and emotions. And, creating the experiences or imagining the experiences in a way that we're most familiar with. And
Mm-hmm.
it doesn't always have the right context, but we will fit the context into our paradigm, right? It's like the whole cognitive dissonance.
Yes.
So, I mean, it's like in that moment when you catch yourself starting to make up a story, because that's what it is, right? Until
Yep.
you dated it, it's just a story. What can you do to break that pattern? What could you do differently?
Hmm. To break the pattern, maybe, well, in retrospect, it's easier to recognize the assumptive. In real time, maybe recognize the feeling because that's easier to identify than tracking the thought. So maybe I can recognize the feeling of, oh, I'm feeling this way again. I'm feeling this shame again. It's truly the feeling of shame. And I do believe that that comes from my childhood trauma, that
Yeah,
unresolved shame from the childhood trauma. I really do believe that.
yeah,
So maybe when I feel that way, I can just, you know, recognize it and say, huh, this is happening again. This is a familiar feeling. The thoughts that I just had that elicited this feeling might not be true.
yeah. And what do you need to give yourself in that moment?
Oh gosh, a lot of compassion. But how does that look like? How can that be practically incorporated or like adopted, like um I would say because shame came, I want to say that shame originated from that childhood wound. Perhaps doing some inner child guided imagery, like a quick imagery, of which I've had done to me and I've done with patients. It's super powerful. I really enjoy it. Um, Simply giving that little medium. I know this sounds corny, but little medium like a hug, like in that moment, just being like it's okay. And just even saying to myself, like Mariuma, you know what I mean? Like the things that people would call me when I was younger, like it's okay, Mariuma, like it's okay. You feel this way. But um it's not your fault that you've taken on so much shame, right? It's something that happened to you that made you feel ashamed, but it wasn't you that did it to yourself. And every time you feel dirty or you feel like wrong, there's that shame that pops up again. And that sense of achievement helped me get personal satisfaction, but also praise from authority figures.
Mhm.
And specifically my grandfather, who was a very safe father figure, you know, um, and he was the patriarch of the family too, like of all the cousins and all the, of all the brothers and uncles and my mom's sister's wife or husbands, and all of like my parents' generation. He was like the patriarch of that generation. And so it was almost like achievement got me to um, run, outrun the shame,
Mm.
but not necessarily like heal it, but
Mm.
like outrun it,
Yeah,
kind of like
yeah,
divert from it.
right.
Um, I still remember because I still remember when my grandpa would he started a weekend school. Um, I remember the feeling of doing really well in school. I remember the feeling of like telling people, "Oh yeah, the principal is my grandpa." Like I used to feel so proud of that. Um, I used to feel really like I wanted to make him proud all the time, even when I went to the Harvard medical system, like and I got in. He was the one of the first people I wanted to tell, and then when he passed away, I felt this deflation occur where I felt like, well, why should I go now? That doesn't matter. It was weird. It was interesting, not weird. It was interesting because I didn't realize that I had those thoughts and those feelings, and that like that was so intertwined, my sense of achievement with him, you know, Allah
Mm.
yarhamu. And so um so I think that I can. So how does that look like? Maybe giving a hug to that inner child, affirming language, you know, um, taking a deep breath just to kind of like rewire the brain a little bit, kind of a physiological boost,
Yeah.
just be present. Um, Remind myself to like let go of the outcome, to like not get so caught up in the web of if then, if then, if then, if then, just be like, well, if yes, so what?
Mhm. Mhm.
You know?
Okay. And
Um,
like, would you love her unconditionally?
yeah, she's a really sweet girl and she wants the best for people.
Yeah.
And she never wanted to harm anyone, never wants to harm anybody, truly.
Yeah.
Um,
Pure soul.
yeah, she was, oh my God, I don't know why I'm getting emotional. She was really innocent. I think I think it's because it's sad to like think about the trauma that would happen to an innocent kid.
Mm.
you know?
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
Sometimes we start recreating that trauma as an adult.
yeah.
The little medium that you love unconditionally, it translates to the big medium, you know? Also love unconditionally, but sometimes forget
Yeah,
as our external environment ends up making us forget,
right,
right? And you said at the beginning, it's about the internal and starting with the internal, right? Like there's the internal and the external, but it all starts with the internal.
right, right, absolutely. Yeah,
And that little Miriam that you love unconditionally, she didn't have to prove anything to you. She didn't have to achieve anything, right? She didn't have to have high performance and productivity, and she didn't have to prove herself to anyone for you to love her unconditionally. And she is you, right? She is you. So how do we build that bridge so that we love you unconditionally?
right,
Others don't see your value. It's not your job to show them.
right.
Because sometimes someone not seeing your value is actually you being protected and
You
guided.
being what, sorry? Protected.
Yeah, to something better
Yes,
that's there for you. So it's like, how can you, in the moments where you start doubting yourself, your value, your self-worth, whether you're even liked, if you're being dismissed, in that moment, how can you hold your ground? And regardless of how someone's talking to you, at you, you know, how can we in that moment stand strong and remember who we are, right?
reminds me of Lion King.
Ah,
Do you remember that when Rafiki goes and when
that,
Rafiki goes and talks to Mufasa and he bumps him across the head and he goes, "Ow!" Oh no, the remember who you are is the father. It's Mufasa.
yes,
Mufasa and Simba. And it's when Mufasa is in the sky and he tells his son, "Remember who you are."
yeah.
Yeah,
Because sometimes we get confused, right? But sometimes we're taking on other people's opinions and ideas of us, and those are not, we don't adopt them. We do adopt them, but we need to recognize that sometimes other people put their insecurities onto us. They project
they
onto.
do. Absolutely. I mean, I know we're running out of time. We ran out of time, but um, briefly, something happened yesterday where another physician that I was covering for, who's somewhat a superior, right? On certain days, she's a superior, um, came in and uh, changed the plan of care for a patient that I had seen the day prior. And I felt like she had come in pretty hot. I was like, okay, all right, all right, fine. And then when we talked about it, she was forthright. I mean, it took her a while to get there. It took her like 15, 20 minutes of talking about the case until finally she says something very truthful. And she goes, I thought to myself, I became insecure. She was very forthright. Said, I became insecure and started to think that I was incompetent because both you and the other physician were in agreement with one plan of care, but my intuition said that there was another plan of care that I would agree with, another plan. And I mentioned to her, that's interesting because that was my original gut reaction too, but it was the medicine team that told me they were uncomfortable with this plan that I presented to them. So then I made sure to highlight, things in my note that reflected what the medical medicine team would like to see happen. Um, she goes, well, that makes me feel a bit better because I felt really incompetent. And then a few hours later in our conversation, we then talked about imposter syndrome, and I attempted to reassure her and say, I hope you know that, you know, many of us suffer from this and you're not the only one. And that, you know, I never want you to doubt yourself because you are a very smart doctor. And I wanted to like provide her with affirmations also to protect myself and to develop a sense of safety of like, I'm not a threat. Like, don't identify me as a threat. Don't fight me, you know, see me as a colleague, because she went to my other superior to talk about this case when I didn't pick up the phone call. And I had told her I wasn't going to come in until a certain time that day because I was there late the night prior and there were no patients to see anyways. I had cleaned it up. I cleaned up the list. So she was just sitting there twiddling her thumbs, like thinking about this case, you know, thinking about her incompetency.
Like needs to do something,
Yes,
right?
she saw an extra patient that I'd already seen yesterday just as a follow-up, just because. And I realized that, wow, we're all just walking around thinking that we're like dumb,
We're just not good enough.
that we're not good enough.
Yeah.
Yeah. And yeah, I thought that, but I'm just really glad that we ended up having a good conversation. But that's another thing that we can talk about at another time. But um, in developing relationships and
Yeah.
a sense of belonging, you know, how to manage the power dynamic
Right.
in the professional setting, to how to not outshine
Mhm.
certain people, but to still shine as a person,
Mm. Yeah.
right? That's I and if I can figure that out, gosh, I would love to write about that or to share my experience with others in medicine, because when you're a doctor in training, you're done with med school, you're a doctor, you have a full license, you get to prescribe stuff, you see patients, in fact, you do more than the attendings most of the time because you're on the front lines, you're the one writing the full note, you're the one seeing the patient more often. But then you have to acquiesce to the attending, you have to like not step on someone's toes, you have to like make sure you clear the plan with them, you can't like, you know, make a medication change without their agreement, like all of this stuff. And having been completely autonomous at one point, having been an attending and now coming back to training, it's difficult.
Yeah.
And thinking about the future, continuing with training to finish my child fellowship just makes me want to go, oh, you know, just this feeling of like, right?
Yeah. To have
And
to
hmm,
to have to go back there.
right.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's a delicate dynamic for sure. For sure.
I think it elicits a bit of that that tender feeling of like shame and that feeling of like I don't want to do anything wrong,
Right.
you know?
Yeah. And it's our relationship with failure that we have to also deal with.
Oh, like what do you mean by that?
How do we relate to failure? How do we relate to doing something wrong? What does that mean? Does that mean I'm
Yeah,
bad? That I'm
right.
no good? Or like what
Yeah,
does
yeah, 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 exactly. When you like come up with a plan or an idea that the attending is like, no,
right?
then you're like, wait, am I dumb? Or like, am I adequate?
And how do we not internalize that and
Yeah,
recognize that in training, an attending might have seen better solutions or alternatives, and it's
right,
the life experience as an attending. And they're helping you pick the bet, make like you're picking something, but they're giving you a better option because they're trying to teach you,
right,
right? How do we not internalize that as like, oh, I did the wrong thing, or
right.
I shouldn't have said that, or now they're gonna think I'm dumb, or and all the disempowering thoughts and beliefs and emotions that we start experiencing that don't bring us forward, and in fact just hold us back, and we're taking a few steps back now because now we're kind of wallowing in the mistake, whereas it was just a stepping stone to get to the next thing, right?
Yes. This is a huge part of development for a medical trainee.
Yeah,
Many of us suffer from this.
right.
Many of us suffer from this. And some of us overcompensate by never treating this issue and then continue a cycle. It becomes a cycle of abuse
Okay.
where then there's a power dynamic, and then there are some that become attendings that are actually bullies.
Need to get their way.
Hmm.
Yeah,
And then that creates a toxic environment, and it just takes one bad apple sometimes.
absolutely. Absolutely. Plus, sometimes there's different paths to get to that result that we're looking for with a patient, right? Like there's different ways to go about it. Sometimes there's no right or wrong. Maybe there's
Right,
right. Like, and then if an attending has a certain preference of how they like to do things, it's not because your way is worse, you know, their way is just more familiar. They're more
right,
doing it that way. They're not
right,
open to different modalities or ways of doing things. So, but I mean, at the end of the day, we have to recognize that you can't control what happens or how people react, right? And the only thing we can do is look at how we're responding to those things. It's to
right,
create that space and say, okay, you know, this just happened. Am I going to internalize it as I'm the problem? Or am I going to say, okay, this is the situation. I gave it my best. Like, what was my intention? Was it good? Yes. Did I give it my all? Yes. Did I do everything I could? Yes. Great. Give yourself a gold star.
yes,
Called being a good doctor, right?
yes,
It's not about the outcome. They didn't choose my plan. It's about I came prepared and I did everything I could to present the best option for my patient because I actually care,
right,
right? Whether they take it or don't, you don't even have to worry about that because it's not on you, it's on them. They get paid to make the decision, right? Like they're there to make that final call if that's what you know, if that's what they're supposed to do.
right.
You just release yourself from the outcome, right? That doesn't matter because you did your part. Now
Mm-hmm,
it's their job to do theirs.
mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah. At that other hospital that I was at, I remember I did my part in sharing my thoughts about a particular case, my concerns. But then instead of the attending coming at it from a perspective of a teaching perspective, she literally engaged in like scolding and huffed and puffed and rolled her eyes and wrote me up. And then that created a snowball effect where there, after that, I could do no right with the program. And it led me to get even more emotionally tangled up, which was not helpful for my health. Complicating the situation was the health. Um, and that led to me just resigning.
And that's the
You know?
bullying. And that's the bullying. That's, you know, that's how it gets packaged.
Yeah.
Yeah. And how much of that is that a reflection on you? And how much of that is a reflection on them, their limited thinking and mindset, and
Mm,
their inadequacies and insecurities, right?
yes.
You wouldn't have to assert your dominance if you were comfortable in your own
In your own.
skin, right?
Yes.
You're confident in your own skin. If you are confident in your abilities, right? You wouldn't have to push so hard and push people out, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Miriam, this was a very, very good coaching conversation today.
Yeah.
I want to know from you, what did you learn about yourself?
Mm.
And what did you learn about yourself today? And how are you going to use that moving forward? What is like one thing you can commit to?
I think the strongest emotional connection I had today was tearing up thinking about the inner child, my inner child, and loving her unconditionally, recognizing that I do love her unconditionally. And in thinking about that, how can I move forward is recognize that no matter where I go, there I am,
Mm,
and there she is.
mhm,
And that, like you mentioned, that little girl that I unconditionally love, like she's still in me, and I deserve to be to unconditionally love myself. It's not going to create a spoiled brat. It's not going to create like a monster that's out of, you know, out of bounds, that it's okay to unconditionally love myself. It's okay to love the way I look right now without makeup, even though I'm judging myself. You know, it's okay to love my body that's, 20 or 30 pounds heavier than I was before I got long COVID. It's okay to, it's okay to like, love the body that right now has some symptoms of long COVID, but is able to go back to work and is able to move forward, to love um, my brain that works differently, that's has its pros and has its cons, but you know, it is what it is, it's just different. It's not good, it's not bad, right? It's got its benefits, and sometimes it outshines other people, but then sometimes it just might not fit in, but I've found ways to adapt and cope.
Yes.
Right. Um, so I would say like that was the strongest emotional connection I had. The greatest thought and like aha moment that I think I had was the concept of relationships versus achievement, and that stage of development. Like that's a psychological stage of development. I forget who it was. Was it Ericksonian, or I forget which psychologist coined that, but there's a sense of achievement that occurs after developing a sense of relationship and the hierarchy of emotional needs. But I seem to have skipped the relationship part a little bit in some cases. And so, you know, I find that like loving that inner child will allow me to have a better relationship with myself, which will allow me to be more present in my relationship with others and allow me to feel to help to develop healthier boundaries with others, including patients, and to achieve enough but not overachieve,
Yeah.
right? um and the achievement to be a sense of like for it to be about the actual achievement, not to prove anything to myself, like I was trying with my grandfather when I was younger, you know. um yeah, so I think loving that inner kiddo is a big part of it'll create sort of a bit of a chain reaction.
Mhm. Absolutely, for sure. I really want to acknowledge you for your own revelations and your awareness of how things are so interconnected.
Mm,
And loving your, you know, your inner child, you create a sense of safety for her, which in turn creates a sense of safety in you, you know, and that translates into a sense of safety with your relationships, right? But I love the fact that you've really started with, you know, your inner self, your younger self, and that will create a domino effect into all aspects of your life. But you are
yeah,
right, it starts with you.
right,
To
right.
what you've always needed to give yourself, even when you were young.
Hmm.
You didn't have the chance to be the adult, right?
Right,
Adults don't give us the things we need, and we feel helpless and hopeless. When we become adults, we recognize that we actually still need to give that younger self what they need. Just because
right,
we grow up doesn't mean that our needs changed.
right,
We still need those things, the unconditional love, the sense of safety and security. We still need all those things, and we have to train ourselves to give ourselves those things, especially in the moments that are most difficult, right? When we become our worst enemy in those moments, those are the exact moments where we're supposed to become our best friend.
right.
Well, Miriam, I am looking forward to our next session.
Same.
I thought we were going to I thought the session was really going to be about us looking at, your most incredible and ambitious goals that you've set for yourself. And although the conversation started that way, I think it sort of ended the way you needed it to go.
Absolutely. Because again, that was looking at achievement,
Mhm. Yeah,
right? Instead of relationship
right,
with myself.
right.
And it all goes back to the deeper yearning of wanting to matter. And I believe that it was all connected. Our intention to talk about the achievements and the projects and the passion projects and all of that was a manifestation of that overachieving self
Right.
wanting to overcompensate for
Yes.
that traumatized little inner child.
Right. Yeah. And oftentimes, the thing we come in for saying we need to be coached on this is often not the thing. The thing is normally not the thing, right? It's just the thing that's masking the thing. And we talk
Yes.
so grateful that we actually got to talk about it and really unpack it today.
Yeah.
I'm sure we'll continue to unpack it as the weeks progress.
Yeah. Yes.
Great. Okay. All right. Well, I guess I'm going to see you next week.
Yes.
All right. Take care of yourself.
Thank you.